Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, internet bots who we pay to keep the stream numbers up, welcome to another week of the Whisky Roundtable. My name is Scott Fitzsimons, and once again, the burden falls to me to pull this ship away from the barge and get us kicking along. It's been another huge week in whiskey, huge amount of releases, huge amount of excitement, all the big topics, none of which we will touch upon tonight, obviously. But we have the full gang here tonight. Matt Bailey, live from lockdown in Victoria, whiskey capital of the world. Is it really a whiskey capital if you can't go to any of the bars? Those sort of philosophical questions we'll answer tonight. But he does have nice key lighting apparently in his room, which we're all very excited about. And he's mentioned about 7 times. Andy Milne, speaking of lighting, we can see him removed from the background in Bondi this week. He's wearing a black T-shirt as well, which helps. Hoping that the Bondi internet is enough to keep the lights and the microphone going. And whiskey culture. Alex Dahlenburg is in the house, is very, very excited. Had some very excited meetings today, which we can't mention tonight, but we just know that she's excited about all those things. Yeah, and of course, guest of honor today. He's a writer, bartender, author, historian, publisher, editor, all-round good bloke, and knows far more about Australian whiskey and whiskey in general than the 4 of us combined. So I've only got an hour to try and squeeze as much from the Luke McCarthy sponge out tonight. So I'm not going to waste any more time and get straight into it. I need a haircut. We all need some whiskey. Ladies and gentlemen, what's in your glass tonight?
Who's going first?
Yeah, go for it.
Me. I actually got a cocktail from a local bar, bit of a takeaway jobby, little Manhattan. And then I've just gone crazy with some other stuff. I just thought I'd just pour some stuff out. I had a little dribble of this left over, and I thought, wow, why don't we get rid of the last of it? So some of you might recognize this whole thing. Sultan's Cove Millennium Gold. I think bottled basically for the Millennium, for the Olympics. I tasted it for the second time recently, and look, it surprised me. I don't think it's as bad as what some people might want to lead you to believe. And then, look, in honour of Bailey, I got a little bit of this 30-year-old Linkwood here from the Society. I thought something old and Scottish. That's a good way to go too. I know Linkwood's a big whiskey that you guys are into. So
I didn't think that, but I appreciate that.
Yeah,
it is just a little bit old for a Linkwood, though. Linkwood should really be consumed between about the ages of 6 and 12 years old.
Yeah. What are you guys doing in the Society then? Come on, Matty. Bottom line earlier.
Yes. Just lazy.
Well, yeah, we left it sitting there way too long. My mistake, obviously. Andy, what's in your glass?
I'm working my way through the Buffalo Trace distillery. So I've got a Buffalo Trace and soda on one side and a glass of Eagle Rare straight up on the other.
Delicious. Not on brand at all.
No, not at all.
No.
Just pure coincidence.
Bales, what do you got?
Well, I started with this funky sort of sour beer from La Sirene, which I'm a huge fan of the brewery, but not of this particular beer. But I'll endure. But I've also got a cask sample of something that we've been working on. And I'm going to say the most Alex Dahlenburg line ever. I can't tell you what it is yet, but it's coming out soon. It's exciting. It's something local. It's
always worth the wait, though.
Yeah, it is. It's something that we've been working on, and it's a bit of a sample of one of our local casks incoming. That's all.
Well, I might jump in there because I'm also on something that I can't tell you what is either, because I'm writing tasting notes. I'm going to go full Dahlenburg as well tonight. And can't tell you what it is.
Does that just mean that I'm the one with all the exclusives?
No.
Fuck it, should I just start cracking into my samples?
it's come from this bottle, which I'll give a quick look at, but something that might be revolving around Forum and might be announced in the next week or so.
The Sydney Whiskey Forum?
Sydney Whiskey. It might be it's going to be bottling for the fair, so now it's bottling for the Forum. Because I'm obviously not drinking during August, so I'm on the heaps of normal beers, but I still have to work, so I have to write tasting notes for this. So that's how.
Very cool.
Not a loophole or anything.
Awesome.
So when are you releasing the Speyburn?
Dahlenburg, I think it's your go.
Yeah, sorry. What were you drinking, Dahlenburg? What was that?
I'm revisiting an old favourite. I've got the Westwood Stout cask tonight.
Oh,
Listen to that. So yes, I'm very, very lucky. I love this one.
Quick shout out to everyone watching on the live stream, to Matt Waller, to the who is watching from out west, the big daddy of the stream, Mark Westmoreland from up in Thurso in Scotland from the Wolfburn Distillery. Jimmy Finnegan's at work, so he's got whiskey in his tea at the moment. To Udo, wherever you are in the world, and Simon is listening in his Wednesday morning in Edinburgh, tuning in. But let's get into it. And Luke, we've had some a lot of people from different parts of the whiskey industry from all over the world on this show in the past 12 months. We've had a few authors as well who have like done the whole freelance thing and that sort of stuff. So before we dig into what you've been doing, how's the past 16, 18 months sort of been for someone who does quite a bit of freelance sort of work?
Mostly pretty shit house, to be honest, as you might expect. So everything was, I suppose, cruising along, building progressively pre-COVID, and then all of the freelance work, tastings, a lot of stuff that was in the pipe, got canned, which happens. There's not much I can do about that, and so we just plowed on through the lockdown here in Melbourne, and the only advantage of lockdown for me here was working on the website. So I just really knuckled down, tried to get as much work done on that as possible, and then when things woke up down here and we were allowed out again, I actually sort of got a hankering to get back into bars. So now I'm doing a little bit of bartending on the side again, which has been fantastic at a really lovely little whiskey bar. Buck Mulligan's in Northcote, and whiskey bar, bookshop, and it sort of ticks a lot of boxes for me. It lets me sort of get my teeth into a lot of literary stuff that I explored years ago. They've got a great whiskey collection, pour a great Guinness, and it's just slightly more relaxed suburban bar as well. So, I'm getting pretty elderly in the bartending stakes. So it's allowed me just to have a really nice place to go to and get back into it a little bit, particularly because, so long there was no contact. Writing about whiskey get to the end of the week, I was just like, Jesus Christ, I need to see someone and talk to someone and get out of my own head a bit. So, the bartending was great for that. And things have just, continued on the roller coaster this year. So, we'll just see how we go from here.
Now before then, you just said the website, a bit more time to work on the website. Tell us, what is it? Aussie Whisky Review. Tell us about it.
Yes, Aussie Whisky Review. Yeah, so it was started in January of 2020, that infamous year. Started during the bushfires too, so it's just a distant memory of the bushfires, isn't it? So the last thing anyone wanted to be hearing about when I launched it was boiling hot Aussie whiskey, and so it was an incredible time to start with, but got it up and running, and the response has been fantastic since. There's a huge amount of work to do. I'm trying to turn it into a very, very large resource, and so just been steadily plugging away at it, and happy with how it's progressing, but still a stack of work, stack of content and research, and current bottling distilleries to get over and across and get out there in the world. So it's progressing, but more work to be done.
And you've been at the forefront of that. You've been at sort of the forefront of reviewing these whiskeys and almost like breaking these distilleries out in many ways for some time. And prior to that, you had your book, your Australian Spirits Guide. Am I getting that right in the name of it?
Correct. Yep.
So, and obviously that's changed with how you sort of communicate that now with Aussie Whisky Review. And I think that's exciting. As you said, like once you write a book about whiskey, in many ways, it's an awesome document of the time, but it's not current. By the time it hits publishing, there's already 20 more distilleries already out there.
That's it. Having chatted to a lot of whiskey, spirits authors around the world over the last few years, that's been the difficulty. And after I published the Australian Spirits Guide, and even going into it, I knew it was going to become dated very quickly. I didn't think it was going to become so dated. Like the rapid progress of the industry definitely took me by surprise as well. And the thought of doing another book on Australian spirits with the amount of new gins, the amount of new distilleries that came out just didn't seem viable to me. So I jumped straight onto an Australian whiskey book, which I've been working on now for probably 5 years. I think this is probably the first time I've really talked about it openly. Still don't have the proper publishing contract deal in the pipe just yet. I'm hoping it's on the way. But yeah, that book is going to be a pretty extensive, hopefully entertaining look at the industry, its history, its current state of play. Sort of, it'll be an extension of Aussie Whisky Review in a lot of ways. And yeah, trying to, I guess, take account of the fact that as soon as that comes to light as well, 5 years down the track, that'll be out of date too. So you have to, in the publishing world now, I think about what's going to happen in the future and make sure you're not creating a relic, but something that is a great, I suppose, resource on its point, on its moment when it was published. So that's a challenge, I think. Yeah.
Alex, you go.
No, please go.
I because I love this sort of stuff, as you know, with the terms of like the publishing and the media sort of things. I have so many questions I want to get about Aussie Whisky Review out tonight. So, Alex, you jump in because I've got so many backed up.
I wanted to ask a question about how you're finding the change in, I suppose, how whiskey gets out there these days versus the influencers versus journalists, with the loss of print. How are you finding that transition, and where do you see it in, say, 5 years? Because I've seen the difference in 5 years now.
Yeah, I suppose I missed the full print era when I came out of uni. Digital was coming, but it hadn't arrived to the extent that we've seen in the last sort of 10 years. And I suppose a couple of different stories that I could relay on that change. The first would be I met Willie Simpson, who was the Fairfax Media drinks columnist beer guy for a while, back in the 2000s, back in the old glory days of print. And I talked to him about his role as a drinks journalist and what he used to get paid, who he used to write for, because he was a Fairfax guy. I basically took over his job in 2014. And he left media then because he thought it was just going down the gurgler. And he opened the Seven Sheds Brewery, fantastic brewery in Tasmania. And so the transition then became, how are media companies going to survive? How are they going to thrive? What platforms do they need to be on? And then the social media age, I think, really started to take hold. And the fascinating thing from my point of view on that fence is that when I first started at Whisky Roundtable, social media wasn't really a thing that bars did. So many businesses didn't really care too much about it. And so I remember, thinking about, influencers and social media people coming into the bar and responding to articles that I was writing for The Age and for other publications. And I guess I never wanted to be in that mold. I came from a print journalism, I suppose, a writing background, and I'd studied quite, extensively in that field. And I wanted to make that happen. That was where I was focused. And now it's very, very different. Social media plays an enormous role. You've got some amazing people, I think, producing some really great content, informing people all over the place, and doing a great job of it. I still think, influencers and social media, I think, have its limitations. And look, there have been some great side effects and some sort of average side effects from that development. But look, it's pretty exciting, that's for it. And it gets people involved. I think that's the beauty of it. It's got a lot of people involved who you might not have had sort of engaging with whiskey or with, so many different niche subjects in the past. So, yeah.
I totally agree. I think it's had its huge successes, but it's also had its downfalls with, for example, miscommunication, the influence it has had on brands if the brands aren't choosing their influencers right. But I think we've seen such a up climb in whiskey followings purely because of the change of the way that we're getting whiskey out there.
Yeah, definitely. And that was something early days, I think probably myself and definitely at Whisky Roundtable, we sort of resisted a little bit. We didn't really understand how to use the medium. And we were when you're a bar, you don't really care about what you're saying digitally. You're sort of like, well, it's all about getting people in so we can give you our experience, what we've worked so hard on. And, that's shifted so dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. It's so different now. And it's incredible just how rapid that change has been, that's for sure.
Yeah, we've all got to have marketing geniuses involved in brands. Purely, it's not just about the juice anymore.
That's it.
Yeah.
But if anyone comes to you and says, hey, I'm a social media master and I can get your things up, turn around and walk the other way as quickly as possible.
Run.
That landscape moves so quickly. My favorite one is, the SEO experts. Your listing will be top of Google. It's like, no, it won't. No. Don't give me that shit.
No.
You'll get the top paid response if you pay enough. The end. That's PPC. There you go. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before Scott deep dives in, you saying you know previous publication is feels outdated already now. Is there anything in terms of sort of that change, like the famous quote from Jancis Robinson on World Atlas of Wine, talking about Australian wine? I think it was simply put, some wine made in Australia, nothing of note. Is there anything that you can recall that's your first or earlier impressions of the spirit scene in Australia that is completely back turned on what you thought was going to be happening?
In terms of do you mean in terms of chat that I might have read or in publications overseas, and then
that you've written
that I've written personally?
Yeah.
I was always a pretty big supporter and very cognizant of the fact that I thought the industry was ripe and that it was going to go great guns. And I was a believer in it as well. And I mean, honestly, I was probably, not to give myself too big a rap, but I was really the only person that was writing extensively about Australian spirits in major, for the majors, early days. So that happened a little bit by accident, but it happened because I was really passionate about the people who were making the spirits, and I got to know them very well, and they were doing really great things. And there was an article I put out in 2014 which basically pitted some of the top Scottish whiskies, French cognacs. What else do we have? We had vodka in there, and we had some other spirits. And I sat a bunch of people down. We did a blind tasting, and people selected what was best. And it was just a really, sort of bullshitty, but also a really fun way of getting people to think about overseas versus local brands. And for a lot of people, they would have read that article and said, "Oh, I never knew we were making this stuff." And so, personally, I never wrote anything that I saw or changed dramatically, or where I was dramatically sort of proved wrong. Definitely saw some international writers discussing Australian spirits and saying, it's all hogwash down there, and it's basically Aussies pissing into bottles and trying to sell it to people. And that's changed dramatically.
Yeah, that was correct. Yeah, that is correct. I mean, but it's often that sort of Australian sort of tall poppy thing going on where people like to piss on the majors a bit and say, "Oh, I'd never read a Herald Sun or I'd never read an Australian or whatever." It's like, but we sometimes forget that that's where most people will discover the category probably early on, and that's so important. And it's that I love it when people saying the newspaper's dying or something. It's like, no, it's people have been saying that for 60 years and it's still going. But it's always that whole sort of, that's where people will discover these brands often. And I distinctly remember hosting tastings as early as like even just 2014, 2015 for groups of people, and they'd say, and I'd mention about regions of whiskey and countries of whiskey, and I'd say even whiskey made in Australia, and they'd say, "Oh, I didn't even know there was whiskey made in Australia." And fast forward 2 years, they'd think that there's maybe 2 or 3 distilleries in Tasmania, and that's it. And they've heard of one of them. They don't know the names of the other 2. And yet now, but it's through that discovery of those majors and of that sort of, I guess, journalism in spirits to say that this is what we produce here and this is what we have. And I don't see, I see that it's hugely important. It's not just no offense at all, but it's not like Aussie Whisky Review is going to often be for the new drinker of Australian whiskey. It's often going to be those who already know the category even exists.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Excellent segue into one of my 4,000 questions I have about the current scheme at Aussie Whisky Review. And I think the first one is really important because what I love about it's a really well researched website. It's got like really authentic, fact-checked, verified information, which is basic. But it is
hard to find these days.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard, but it is behind a paywall. So I'm just like using an example. I'm looking at the live chat we have today. We've got people like Mark Westmoreland from the Wolfburn Distillery, so heavily involved in whiskey, but in Scotland. You've got people from the industry like Kathleen Davies and Fiona Beasley and those sort of people in different parts of the industry. You got people like our friend Daniel, who I would consider a hyper engaged consumer, but based in Dubbo, so doesn't get access to the tastings in the city and that sort of thing. So, like, who is the market for the Oz Whisky Review? Are you talking to the industry? Are you talking to the hyper engaged consumer? When you're writing, what is your audience that you're writing to?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something I think about a lot. And I still, in a way, I still think I'm trying to figure that out exactly. The reason for the paywall was many-fold, basically. I had to find a way to generate income from the website somehow. And I didn't really want to go down the advertising branded content route. I find that really dull. I don't really, and I'm not a specialist in it as well. Like, I think it takes someone with that business nous and someone who's been around, seeking out advertising and who's good at it and who enjoys that. And it's not my strength. And so the only other way to derive income from the site was to develop a paywall. I also liked where a lot of different major publications were heading in terms of their paywalls. And, all the publications I read were behind paywalls suddenly. And so then it becomes, what's the purpose? How do you get people to think about your content as valuable enough to pay for it? And so mostly when I'm sitting down to produce anything for Aussie Whisky Review, those are the sort of questions that I ask myself. How do people want to engage with Australian information are they after? And, what information is limited? What's hard to come by? And throughout the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years of writing about particularly the local scene in particular, there's so much information that I've come across that I haven't been able to publish anywhere because it's too limited or it's considered by the majors to not be interesting enough for a broader audience. And so at that stage, I sort of went, well, but then in tastings, I was feeding people these morsels of all this crazy stuff and they were loving it. So, and then I was sitting there in the tastings that I did, and I've done, hundreds and hundreds of tastings and classes. And I thought, well, if people are happy to pay for the experience and pay for the chat, and the chat is a big part of that experience, then surely I must be able to transfer that to a digital platform and hopefully develop something similar there. And that was a part of the paywall idea and the paywall structure. And look, I still don't think it's perfect. It still needs work. And the resource itself, Aussie Whisky Review, is not entirely ready. I think it needs way more content. I want to have every distillery, every major whiskey release and every minor whiskey release eventually on that site. I'm broadly thinking about Scotchvista.com and Nonjada and some of these incredible online digital resources. And I would have paid enormous money to keep Scotchwhisky.com alive when I was working in bars and at Whisky Roundtable. I used it almost every day. And so did tons of other people around the world. And the fact that Scotchwhisky.com, a site that was so well read and so popular and so well put together by geniuses of the industry, couldn't find a way to be financially viable. I just sat there and thought from the beginning, well, I have to have a model that ensures that people are going to have to pay for content. Because, I work, ultimately as well for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer because I work super hard on this content. I always have worked hard on the writing that I produce. And so I never had a problem with the subscriber model. I thought I'd be able to produce content that's good enough. But you're right, the audience itself, which was really the heart of your question, whether or not that audience is there and who that audience is, and whether or not enough of that audience is going to pay for that content, that's the big gamble on the roll of the dice. And I guess we'll see how that plays out in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, if you bear with me editorializing for just a little bit, I think it's exactly the right route to go down because for me, it's sort of that question of free shipping. There is no such thing. No such thing. A website that is free, there's no such thing. Someone is paying for that somewhere, whether that's in branded content or advertising, and therefore there are other things at play. And I think for anyone who is on the stream, I think that's so important. I barely read anything these days that I don't pay for. Whether it's for booze or, The Athletic, I think, from a sports point of view, if people are any sports fans, The Athletic is the gold standard of this hyper narrow niche content, but done exceptionally well. So I think it's exactly the right way to do it. I guess my follow-up question to that is, for people who log onto the website, they can see the tabs and they can see the different sections, and the word Oz Whisky, the word review appears in that. But you've just sort of mentioned Scotch Whisky and there. I mean, I have a subscription, so I know what's on there. But like, what is Oz Whisky Review? Like, is it a database of distilleries? Is it new releases? Is it breaking news? Like, what does it stand for and what is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. The review thing has been interesting. It probably wasn't something I anticipated because I think people think some people think it's just solely a review website and all we do is review whiskey. that was never my intention with it. Again, this is probably my small, narrow literary world that I live in, where a lot of review publications, and review as a term, as a publication, is very old, and it means, in that sense, a wholesale, broad, in-depth review of a subject. And that's really what my meaning was in terms of developing Oz Whisky Review. Oz was something that I laboured over a lot. Names are never perfect. I don't think I've ever been a particular genius at naming things. Oz for me was an indication of the wonderment and the weirdness of Australian whiskey. Oz is an international word. It's really an international term that's been ascribed to Australia as well, and whiskey in Australia is exactly that. It's an international product that's been brought to Australia, not indigenous to here. And so that was my thinking behind that as well. I want the website to be international in its thinking and its approach, but I want it to solely, be pretty much about Australian whiskey. It will ultimately, hopefully, turn into an Australian whiskey resource. Whether or not we go down the route of also adding content, also reviewing whiskies from overseas, it's something that I'm not closed off to, but it's not necessarily something I want to focus on at the moment, primarily because I can't even keep up with the Australian whiskey industry. I want the site to be, the ultimate resource on Australian whiskey. That's basically where I'm heading with it. And until I reach that goal, I don't really think we'll play around with international stuff, even though that's something I'd love to do because I'm massively passionate about whiskies from around the world as well. So yeah, that's the approach. And it needs tinkering, it needs work, that's for sure. But that's where we're looking to go.
As you were saying about the sort of getting all the content ready and things, being in the office with the team from Scotchvista.com before they launched, before they set up, there was a very large number of writers behind the scenes that, there was obviously the wonderful trio of editors, but the amount of additional work of research and study that multiple people were putting in just getting that database of distilleries up was, colossal. And it's not just, do a couple of Google searches and scrape the data. It was, there was a huge pile of books piled up on the desk, and it was just, leafing through to find every bit of fact and data. So it's it's this incredible amount of work to be able to put that together for Australia.
Luke, can I also just check in with you on something? I want to ask, just almost following on from Scotty's comment before about the kind of content you sort of publish on there. You were sort of responsible, but not sort of, you were responsible for the breaking open of the whole Mr. Leopoldo, the Leopoldo collection of whiskey. And for those who don't know it, it's probably the most important find of Australian whiskey in the last 10 years of just the sheer collection of Australian whiskey history, both in documentation and in bottled form. How did that come about? How did you even find this guy? And where does the genesis of that begin?
Yeah, so I was contacted via email, actually. I very nearly deleted the email because I thought it was sort of virus-laden or a piece of weird bullshit spam. And it was really poorly worded, constructed email. And so I was looking at it going, oh, Jesus, is this a really awesome attempt at trying to get me some malware all over my computer? But yeah, I clicked the email open and I read it, and the body, again, like it was Greg. Greg probably, I doubt he's watching this, but if he is, it wasn't the best worded email. Then I saw the pictures and the photos. I almost fell off my chair. I couldn't believe it. I've been studying that side of the spirits and whiskey industry in Australia for a number of years, and suddenly things that I really only imagined in my brain and read off newspaper clippings and crazy documents were just made actual in these photos. And I called about 5 people. I think I was like, oh my god, you're never gonna believe what I found. I don't even know if this is real or someone's like taking the piss. I'm totally unsure. It was right in the middle of COVID, and so what happened was I contacted them and said, okay, what's the deal? We had a chat. And then they started throwing around some numbers, and I was a bit like, okay, so this is something a little bit beyond what I was thinking. And then eventually, once the restrictions lifted, I got in contact with them again, and I popped over to Charlie's and sat down with them and had a chat. And as Max described it as well, it's a fairy tale moment, especially because the stuff is so rare. It's beyond rare. It's so rare that no one's even interested in it, and there's probably 10 people in the world that know anything about it. And I was conscious of that. Yeah, and obviously I was one of them, which was the reason I was there. So, and then from there, we just sat down and had I'm just trying to remember what it was, Canadian Club and Dries out of the can, and had a coffee and went around and just checked out the stuff and just kept pulling out things. And yeah, it needs an archivist. It needs a team of people. It's incredibly extensive, and it could be a game changer, I think, for the way we think about Australian history in the past.
It's potentially
there's just a lot of difficulty.
the most important collection of Australian whiskey and Australian whiskey history in one place.
How?
Yeah.
For someone who doesn't know about it, tell me about how.
Yeah, how did it?
Charlie Leopoldo. Charlie worked for United Distillers, and both Charlie and Greg, his childhood friend who is acting on his behalf and is trying to sell the collection, they both worked at the Federal Distillery in Port Melbourne. They started there in the 60s and 70s, and Charlie stayed there as basically a merchandiser. So he's got incredible photos. What he used to do was go around, and you know how like window dressing happens in clothing stores these days? So he used to window dress for whiskey. So he'd go around and do little windows full of like Old Court and, well, not so much Old Court then, but by his stage it was more Corio, Core, Glencore, and all these other crazy brands which no one's heard of. And he would go around to various tastings and events, and he would handle all the merchandise. And so that was his role for United Distillers, who at that stage still had enormous quantities of whiskey to sell. When he started there, it was still a pretty successful company. And then by the mid to late 70s, everything turned to shit. And unfortunately, a lot of people lost their jobs. Those facilities were eventually closed. Federal in Port Melbourne stopped distilling in sort of the 70s. And then Corio ultimately shut in, sort of the mid-80s, but stopped distilling in 1980. And he was working between a couple of those different sites and in the headquarters based here in Melbourne. And basically the manager of the distillery at the time, he said to Charlie, we're going to chuck all this stuff out. And Charlie was the guy in charge of it. He was moving around a bunch, and he would be interested in collecting since his youth. And they were both just like, we can't chuck this out. Like, this is incredibly important stuff. This should be in a museum or in the National Archives. And the Sydney office was basically like, if we send it up this way, well, we're just going to chuck it in landfill. And so they just moved it in a few different ways, and Charlie gradually just picked away at it and got most of the collection home, sat on it for 3 decades thinking this is all worthless. No one's going to care anything about this. But he never opened any of the bottles, and he kept the records in good nick. The photos, some of them are in immaculate condition. The labels, some of them from 120 years ago, are in immaculate condition. They're absolutely mint. He held on to it all. And so when I first looked through the collection, I was staggered. It was a fairy tale moment.
It's an amazing piece of history. Wow.
It's very cool.
You said it needs archiving. It needs a team to go in, and they're trying to sell it. What stage is the collection at now? I mean, presumably lockdowns put a bit of a spanner in the works.
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak on their behalf. They're after a significant sum of money for the collection, and they want the collection to stay together, which is probably the real sticking point, because there are a number of organisations that would be interested in purchasing sections of the collection. Some would love to take the bottles, others would love to take all the archival material, the records, and so forth. Others would like to nitpick at things and would probably be willing to pay significant money for those. It's just the issue is Charlie wants to keep it together because he feels that's the truest expression of the collection, and the best way to preserve it. So
how many bottles?
About 70 odd, I think. Probably about 70 to 80. That's just the whiskies though. I've never really got to sit down, because it's just such a crazy story. I've never got to sit down with, I don't really know if there's anyone in the country doing this, but with gin being so popular and Australian gin being so popular, it opens up an entirely new window on Australian gin history too. So if you wanted to properly chart what Australian gin used to look like, going all the way back to the late 1800s, then you can have a crack at it with that collection. And so I think there must be about 40 to 60 bottles of gin. Again, some of them mint condition gins from the early 1900s. So that stuff's pretty cool as well. And there's so many avenues of exploration in the collection. Honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen to it. It's anyone's guess at the moment.
Has anyone got a spirits museum?
Yeah,
So
let's see it. All the round table are going to buy it. That was the whole sort of premise of this show. We're all going to buy it.
Yay, we practiced it.
A large chunk of cash each. That's how we're doing it. Come on.
all those bots are working for us, right, Scotty?
Yeah, come on, Scotty.
That's what I spent the slush fund on, was on the bots. There's no money left.
The slush fund, the petty cash drawer. It finally got to work out.
One day you'll explain to me what the hell you're talking about when you say internet bots. But anyway.
You know what? It also reminds me, by the way, Luke, of this whole. I saw recently Dr. Nick Morgan got involved with this thing where this guy in the UK found a spirit entry journal from Oban Distillery, and it was the distillery journals like from the like late 1800s kind of spirit journal with all the blotting ink and each run and the proof of each run and everything. And the guy found it and was looking to sell it because he found it. He was throwing it out. It's like, well, we don't use this stuff anymore. This is old records, and every time over history of these distilleries in Australia as well, new ownership comes in, goes, let's give it a rebrand, let's chuck everything out, let's start again, let's keep fresh, relabel everything, and everyone sees that, and it seems to happen more frequently now than ever. But even back then, it was sort of like, well, that's old stuff. We don't need old blotting books. We don't need old record-keeping books. We'll just – it's almost a shame.
Yeah.
It does get thrown out.
There was a really interesting debate that came on there because Nick was very much that it should be back in the hands of the distillery and, it shouldn't have left in the first place. And then a ton of distillery workers chimed in and said, I used to work at X in the 70s and everything ended up in the skip. And, I've got a few things at home that I – decided to keep for my own memories and stuff, and it was a huge volume of people were in there just saying, I've got some. So
it's interesting, like all this stuff that was deemed worthless is now highly valuable and highly sought after, and not just Australian whiskey but all over. But it's also fraught with disaster as well, because our friends at Macallan had the issue of going out and having to buy back their history, putting it on display, and then realizing that a big proportion of it was fake. It's not in the press release, but that's what happened.
But it's the thing I hate about people asking about, what should I invest in and what should I have in my collection? If everyone, Ardbeg classically did it where they kind of created this annual release that was collectible, and the vast majority are all the same age, and at some point in the next 20 years, there's probably going to be a mass, exodus of Ardbeg on the market because everyone is either, going to be passing away or getting to the point where they decide that they wish to sell their collection and move it on and actually take the profit. And everyone's going to have the same collection. And outside of Galileo and Supernova, it's all going to be crap. So sorry, LVMH. But it's. It's
What's that about a fucking solid, amazing brand?
If you've tried the later releases of Ardbeg,
the last 5 years of special release. The last 5 years of special releases.
Decade, No, some of it's all right. But it is that strange thing of the collectible things that people think are collectible. If everyone collects it, it's not collectible, or it is in the short term and never in the long term because everyone's got it in their bloody cupboard.
It's an interesting topic as well that I'm going to loop back into. What Luke does is that I get once a week or so, I get an email or a phone call saying, I found this bottle. Can you value it for me? What's it worth? What can I sell it for? And I can do that to a certain degree with my limited knowledge. But that's a full-time job. Like, that's why auction houses pay good money for experts to do that. And I think there's that sort of element going around of, I've got this, where can I get this information for free? Which is looping back through. Obviously, Luke, for anyone who's not familiar with yourself or with Aussie Whisky Review, you can tell just by this short time of talking, everything you talk about is research. It's fact checked. It's really, and that's really, really important. And I think I'm very wary of the fact we are streaming through social media sites at the moment. But for me, the biggest problem, and it's been a problem since social media started, if I'm walking down Elizabeth Street out the front of the Oak Barrel here, and there's a car crash, I turn and I look at that car crash. I didn't want it to happen. I'm not happy that it happened. I'd prefer that it didn't happen, but I'm turning and looking to see what did happen. Now, on Facebook, the algorithm will always reward that. And while I love in certain aspects, Alex, a lot what you were talking about before, the democratization of language and getting, anyone can jump on it and say what they want. That's great, in many, many ways. But then you get these car crashes that these conversations and threads of words and knowledge that may not be correct and may be actually quite damaging or libel or all these sorts of things, and they spiral out of control. They're cheap and easy because it's free to create these conversations. So, Luke, I mean, how do you combat that? Do you just have to physically rise above it and say, I can't fight every fight that happens in these social media channels? I just need to stick with what I'm doing, and then hopefully that cream rises to the crop?
In a lot of ways, Aussie Whisky Review is an answer to that as well. When I was the drinks columnist for Fairfax, part of my job was to, produce content that people would read, and that not, 5,000 people would read, that 150,000 people would read. And so throughout that process, I was conscious of, balancing those interests, not trying to create car crashes, trying to create informed content, but then also conscious of the fact that, some people will read certain bits of media a lot more than others, and they'll engage with them and enjoy them more, and get more out of them. And so, the difficulty there is balance. When I was writing for Fairfax, I found it much more difficult. I found it really hard, particularly the comments and the commentary around some of the articles, because I couldn't go into as much depth as I would like. You'd get the responses from people, or they'd share them in certain ways, say certain things about the articles and the pieces. And again, that was my interest, and I suppose one of the impetuses for developing Aussie Whisky Review, because I don't have a problem with that. I find it really easy just to go, well, this is what I want to write about, and this is why. And yes, certain pieces that I write, which I put enormous amounts of time into, there's a dozen people clicking on it sometimes, or a few dozen. And that doesn't bother me, because having been in the game for a while now, and even things that I wrote in the Australian Spirits Guide and in other publications before that, I now see their value. Like, for instance, interviewing Spike Desert
oh my God.
At the Kimberley distillery out there, and went up into the Kimberley and spent some time with Spike, and recorded his interview, wrote the story down. And when the Australian Spirits Guide came up, I don't think I had anyone mention Spike or the rum they were making there, or the process. I made sure to publish the distillation process in a really detailed way. And again, I don't think anyone's really talked about that and mentioned it to me. I don't know if anyone got anything out of that. But when Spike passed on, apart from the distillery records they have there, that's the only recording of his method, how he built that still, how that whole process developed. And so, having been in it long enough, I recognize when there is value in bits of information, in certain articles, in bits of content that not everyone might have a lot of use for, or it doesn't really float their boat. But that's the point of, and having worked in publishing, and I studied publishing too. It's a long game. It's like whiskey, so you've got to remain calm. And some car crashes will happen. Some, unfortunately, you just got to walk past and keep going.
And for anyone watching, and I'm going to get off my soapbox in a second, but I really implore you to put your money where your mouth is when it comes to this. One thing, I'm going to pick on a website. It's Fox Sports, who, as the name suggests, if you're not familiar, they report on Fox. They report on sports, right? And every now and again on Fox Sports, on their Facebook thing, they'll put in a story, and it'll have nothing to do with sports. It'll be some tennis star's got a new girlfriend, and she did something on Instagram, and the comment thread will be, this is ridiculous. Why is Fox Sports reporting on this? Blah, 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 blah. And I guarantee you it's because everyone clicked on it. And that is like, that's the sort of thing when I talk about car crashes. So for people watching today who are interested in whiskey, click on the right stuff, put the money where the mouth is, and that will drag the conversation up to where it should be had. So like we have the power as the readers. We choose what we click on. And if you're scrolling through before you go to bed or when you wake up on your phone, don't click on the Daily Mail article or with a 3-sentence long headline that means absolutely nothing. Take the time and, read proper content because everyone will benefit.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. There's so much misinformation out there on social media. And I know that we need to look beyond now, beyond social media for information, and go to websites that are actually written by journalists that research everything, because we are getting informed content, especially in whiskey and your whiskey journey. I have a question. What came first, whiskey or writing?
Writing. Yeah.
Writing.
Yeah, definitely. I was writing from a pretty young age. I got heavily into it in my teenage years. And I was actually thinking about a career playing cricket when I was younger. And was just turned off that because I became more passionate about writing. And instead of looking to play cricket in Australia and do a bit of travel with it, I decided to study writing instead. So writing came first. And then I started working in bars and then did some travel. It was really probably the travel and the Melbourne whiskey industry here, the broader Australian whiskey industry, that then sort of tipped me over into, combining the two.
Very cool. Very cool. Shall we head into Prowst?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just a suggestion. Seemed like a segue. And then we only got through about 3 of Scott's 8,000 questions.
That's right. On the topic of subscription models, for just $5.99, you can get the up late version where I tie Luke down and ask him questions for another 6 hours.
Oh, God. Guys, we cannot make it our after show because I've seen what you guys get up to.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Just a monthly subscription on Patreon, and you can join us.
I keep relatively clothed. Come on.
We tie Luke up for 6 hours. Done. 6 hours for $6. Come on, guys.
Right. This is.
Y'all are going to get us cancelled.
Already whiskey dinner.
Come on.
I'm looking forward to Prowst this time around because from our experience with this, or at least for me, it's the writers who have responded best and give the best answers to this. So who's up first?
Well, you are. You just amped it up. You asked the first one.
Get it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go have to the obvious one that we've asked. I think all the writers. So, which word or phrase do you overuse when talking about whiskey?
Many. Fascinating, I would say. Yes, I use fascinating way too much, and fascinating and unique. Unique is a word that, as a writer, you try to never use anyway, but I find it cropping up all the time in my writing, and I try and edit it out consistently. So, fascinating in particular, because fascinating whiskey, does it even really make sense? I find myself saying fascinating in the bar a lot just to try and sometimes get people into a whiskey which they might not be keen on. So that's the one I've got to get rid of.
I use a thesaurus for that kind of thing when I'm writing a word too much. I know that's really lame, but I use
that's
you should use the thesaurus. Is brilliant.
That's what a thesaurus is for.
I know, but when you think about writing, you should have all these words in your head. Thesaurus.
No. That's literally why a thesaurus exists.
Yeah.
You can find out Roger's thesaurus. Roger is fantastic. It groups words in a slightly different way to what you see online, and I think it does it better. Worth having a copy of Roger.
I've got a big old hardcover copy of Roger's here somewhere. It's very good.
I feel I feel a bit better now. Thank you for telling me that it's normal.
just on that, I think we have to be careful about eradicating words. We've had this argument about smooth, and I think I'm dead against the overuse of words. But sometimes there are whiskies that are fascinating or unique, particularly when you look at whiskey in a holistic, what have we've been talking about a fascinating history about Australian whiskey. So some of those whiskies that Matt Bailey put up, I would describe them as fascinating. I think that would, be justifiably used. So I think we have to be careful about eradicating words, but certainly let's just use them a little bit more sparingly.
I don't think that was eradicating at all. I think that's a word that it can be used super well in whiskey.
So let me get this right. So if a whiskey's fantastic, it's unique.
Delicious.
If it's fascinating, if it's fascinating, then it's interesting. If it's interesting, it's shit. Yes. Got it. So I just want to make sure we're all across the terminology here, the layers.
I have a
Unique,
question.
fascinating is interesting, and interesting is shit.
Okay, I like that.
There you go.
There we go. We just came up with our tagline for Whisky Roundtable.
Yeah.
I have a question that I'm not sure we've asked yet. What is your saddest whiskey memory?
Ooh.
Saddest whiskey memory. Look, I've drank whiskey. I had a lot of wakes and a lot of deaths and things like that. But one, it's not really a memory. It's more something I missed out on. My grandfather was about the only person in my family who sort of loved and drank whiskey. And unfortunately, he died 2 months before I was born. So I never got to drink whiskey with him. So that for me, would probably be one of my saddest whiskey memories, moments, things that that I haven't got to get around, unfortunately, but not much we could do there. Yeah.
Matt, do you have a saddest whiskey memory?
Oh.
Because I know we've done Prowst questions before on each other, but not this question.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know. I mean, I definitely answered this question when I filled out my Prowst for Ardent, but I just there's certainly been instances of mine's actually quite similar to Luke's in that I never met either of my grandfathers, but like my adopted grandfather growing up was someone who quite enjoyed whiskey, and him passing away when we couldn't have a dram anymore was quite sad. But on a small level, it'd be things like I've certainly been in that position where you travel to a distillery, it says they're open, you've driven all the way over there, and then they're closed that day or something, and you're like, I don't know, like this. That's really petty bullshit, really, when you think about it. But who cares? Like, I don't know.
There was this one time at Whiskey and Almond that I booked in for a tasting. And so you go up into the top room there, and I'm like, great. I'm getting Luke, or I'm getting Jules or Brooke or someone. This is going to be excellent. And I get there, and then Matt Bailey pops up and says, "G'day, welcome to this tasting." That for me was the saddest whiskey memory.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome.
And you can't really. I was sitting like up the front near the window, so you can't really walk out without everyone seeing you as well. So I had to sit through the whole thing as well. It was disaster.
It is an awkward venue in terms of leaving or coming or going mid tasting. You're like, oh, are you walking straight up to the presenter up the stairs? Don't mind me, I'm just coming up the stairs.
Yeah.
Don't turn up late to one of those.
Milne?
It's kind of similar. I think I probably have two. I also never met my grandfather, and I discovered many years later that he'd collected miniatures from many of the distilleries, and so at home we have this shoebox. I think it's still in a shoebox of all these different miniatures that he's picked up. Crazy stuff. It's now Bowmore 12 Deluxe and things like that. Just phenomenal liquid. And then, but there's some very odd things as well. That was, a Bell's bottle with a white label over the top of it with a handwritten label of, something bottled specially for, the Parent Teachers Association lunch. This is kind of just to sit with them and understand what the hell was in this box more than anything else. But so that's probably up there. The other one where I think I was quite emotional was the very last whiskey show that I ever run, knowing that was my sort of final thing in the UK for my career at that time. It's just like I'll be gone now, and it will be a new stage. So it was a good sadness, but it was that kind of reflection and kind of sad moment of like, this certainly won't happen again in the short term.
Yeah.
How about you, Alex? Come on. I'm gonna flip that one back on you.
Oh shit! I didn't want that. My saddest whiskey memory recently was leaving my babies on the back bar at Milne
Oh,
and having my last lay back out of the hammer.
yeah.
And I was on my knees. Yes, and Ross was pouring it into my face and it went everywhere. But that was probably my saddest whiskey memory.
Andy, actually, you just reminded me as well of the miniatures thing from your grandfather. Was a friend of mine in Sydney had all these miniatures from his father, and they were all these like really old miniatures of whiskey, and I'm talking Convermore's and Milburns and things like that, and Port Ellens and all these like interesting miniatures. They'd all had it. They're all sawdust in a glass, and they'd all something. And miniatures don't age well. I've found from memory. I don't know.
Yeah, it varies.
It varies. I know, but it was very mixed bag.
But you probably wouldn't have known that at the time that our parents and grandparents were collecting, because
no, not at all. That's what I'm saying. Like over time, it's not held up in the bottle.
Just quietly, can you imagine all of the miniatures or sample bottles we're going to leave our bloody grandchildren?
None.
Like with the drawers and the amounts.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got 3
Not a
fucking
drop.
drawers worth of samples and miniatures. But these poor kids, they'll end up.
I literally threw out dozens recently. That I'm not leaving anything. It's all gone. Scotty, how about your saddest whiskey memory?
No, I already said mine.
Oh, you did. Sorry.
But it involved you. But I just on that, I've actually put it. There's a few people in my life, like very good friends from throughout my childhood and adulthood and whatever, that know that whenever I go, every bottle that is in the estate, there probably won't be a lot left, needs to be drunk at that party. Like
Ooh,
that needs needs to go. None of this hanging around. It all needs to go.
With the way I collect whiskey, that's going to be one hell of a party purely because I don't open anything.
Maybe it goes for a week. Like
I think go for a full embalming.
Yeah. I like that sort of that element of everyone always says we can't you can't take it with you, drink it now, and that's very true, and I know that, but chances are there will be something that I leave behind eventually. So I kind of like that idea of, well, this fucking idiot didn't think thought he could take it with him, but we're going to drink it now because he couldn't.
Good sound, Andy.
Good sound. Very good sound.
Yeah.
Luke.
All right, next Prowst.
I'm going to untake the next Prowst. Now, this is not one that you probably normally ask maybe. Actually, no. This is really appropriate given what you do at Aussie Whisky Review, at least. The question is, what do you appreciate most in a whiskey? And it's like you're tasting a lot of whiskeys, especially Australian whiskeys. But I mean, what do you appreciate most in a whiskey?
I think integration between spirit and cask is a big one. Balance, complexity. Something that says maybe a whiskey that has the ability to say something about where it's from, how it's made is always fantastic. I really appreciate that. It's not easy to do, but if you can capture that in the final whiskey, that's always an achievement. That's pretty much about it. There's many other things I appreciate about a whiskey, but I dribble on. I reckon that's pretty much it.
Fair enough.
Very cool. Matt Waller.
That's a very good comment, actually. I like that.
Excellent. For those listening back, Matt Waller has commented, people collect spoons and some collect whiskey. I would rather be drinking the whiskey at a wake than eating off the spoons. And I think we wholeheartly agree with that one.
So collectors get stuffed. Who was next on Prowst?
You've stolen all the gems.
No, there's what?
So many.
25, 30 different Prousts. Pick one.
Oh, the others are crap. Come on. No.
I can pick those out for you because there was one I was going to ask, but you go ahead. You go ahead.
Between two.
So they're all crap, but now I can't choose out of them.
I know. You can't dress up a turd. Who do you most admire in whiskey?
Most admire many people. I think.
No. Who?
Who? An individual?
We drill our guests on this. You can't say, "Oh, there's lots of people that I admire." No,
Oh,
who do you
I
admire
love the
most?
entire whiskey community. That's who I admire.
Oh, I love all the
I
bullshit.
just love
You
you.
don't.
Individual.
None of us do. None of us
Like
do.
So,
to
I
thank
mean,
God.
you want to be more specific with your question. Are you saying which one person do I most admire? Is that the question? Or
No,
Who do you most admire? That's
I mean,
pretty
you let Dave
straightforward.
Broom get away with the farmers, maltsters, mashmen, brewers, and distillers,
No,
the
I
warehouse
wouldn't
teams,
you.
the managers, and the hospitality staff, the lorry drivers, coopers, coppersmiths, archivists, brandmasters, and bartenders, and the drinkers.
But on live, we didn't let him get away with that.
who I most admire? From a recent trip to Whitton Malthouse, and because I sort of hail from that region,
Where?
I
Sorry.
really admire the farmers who make the grain that ultimately create the whiskey. They're probably the unsung heroes of the entire whiskey field, and the risk involved in it, the challenge of farming, how important farming is going to become in the next 15, 20 years, how much it's going to change. I would love to see farmers talked more about in the whiskey story, and I don't think it's happening that much at the moment. And without them, the whole thing doesn't exist. So really admire the farmers. I think they have a pretty rough end of the deal, and they're making it work, and ultimately supplying us with some awesome stuff. So how about
Where are you
that?
from, Luke?
I've picked one.
Where are you from, Luke?
I was born in Orange, so not too far in that area. Yeah.
God's country.
Yeah.
It's still, yeah.
Does God only have one country? I thought surely.
Yeah. It's a Chardonnay vineyard in Orange.
Yeah, wow.
All right.
All right. Is that everyone's? No, Scotty.
Yeah, I think
Quietly, this is drinking really good. This has actually opened up since I last tried it. I'm actually really digging it.
So
I still
do you
don't
want to
believe you,
quickly?
but okay.
Do you want to quickly, because there'll be a lot of people who I've been lucky enough to sample, if not that bottle, a very similar one. But I'm going to put you on the big screen now. Do you want to just quickly take people through that bottle as a bit of what you've got there?
The Millennium Gold. So one of the earlier Sullivan's Cove bottlings. I've heard the distillery guys, the workers, even have slightly different facts about exactly what it is. But from what I've heard, it's sort of 2 to 5 year old whiskey distilled in Hobart there at the original distillery in the gasworks. And I've had different things about the cask, whether or not they were new oak. I think most of them were new oak, or some potentially whiskey refill casks, bottled around 1999, 2000. And a lot of people have written it off as just awful. Early years of Sullivan's were disgusting. It's not perfect. It's not a gobsmacking whiskey, but it's pretty fun. And you really get the Sullivan's UMAC character coming through, which you never get anymore because so much Sullivan's is now bottled at a beautiful old age. So it's got all the bones and the structure of Sullivan's to it. I just think it's really fun.
If I can just quickly show, actually, Scotty's seen this before. I remember years ago I tasted this, also from a similar era, Luke, which was this Sullivan's Cove Premium Blend Scotch Whisky.
Yeah.
There it is.
That's a different story.
Well, that's a different story entirely, but I love that it says Sullivan's Cove Premium Blend Scotch Whisky from the Tasmania Distillery at Toomeray Street, Hobart, product of Scotland, blended and bottled in Australia. And that's one way to sell it.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, it's now a legal precedent. So anyone who tries to bottle whiskey incorrectly in this country, that's one of the legal precedents that lawyers and judges will return to. So there you go.
Exactly. We've taken up more of your time than we thought we were going to. Scotty, lead us out.
Luke, thank you so much for your time. And I think, as the comment that Lee put in just there, thank you so much for the effort that you've put into Australian whiskey. And I know, stumbling across things like the collection and having those conversations with Spike are great. I know there's hours and hours and days and weeks and months and years of not so exciting discoveries that lead up to those sorts of moments, and they often get glazed over a little bit. So thank you very much on behalf of all people involved in the Australian whiskey for choosing our industry to be passionate about and be involved in. And to those who are watching, put your money where your mouth is. You know, we spend money on different things, and I know you know there's a lot of pulls on the purse for subscriptions and that sort of thing. There is, I've got it. There is actually sweet fuck all worth watching on Disney Plus. Same with Amazon Prime. Cancel both of those subscriptions. Subscribe to Oz Whisky Review instead. You get twice the valuable content. You'll save you $10. And tonight is special deal, which I've just come up with now. So this is not approved by Luke, but we'll go. If you use the code interesting equals shit at the subscribe button, Matt Bailey will pay for your first month subscription to Oz Whisky Review. So that's, you read it here first.
Scotty likes to cost me a lot of money. Look, I hope you get lots of subscribers off that, and I will gladly chip in. I'll gladly chip in. You know what? That's fantastic, and I think everyone should subscribe to Oz Whisky Review. I've been a subscriber now, I think, since February 2020, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. So thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Scotty. Really appreciate the chat and for having me on. And yeah, thank you guys for having a chat during what is a pretty weird, strange, awful time for both of our cities. So yeah, may we come out and hopefully we can do this in person sometime. That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Bloody oath. And genuinely, if anyone does, I don't know if there is a comment section on the subscription form, but if anyone, or like maybe the follow-up to the receipt email, if you put the code interesting equals shit somewhere in there, Luke, let us know, and between the four of us, we'll chip in for the second month or something like that for people. That's a bona fide Whisky Roundtable promise.
Done.
Equals as in the symbol, or equals as the word?
Or both.
Both. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay, let's see how that rolls.
Love it. Thank you so much,
How much
guys.
is the
Thank you.
subscription, though, guys? You could cost us a lot of money.
No.
Individual subscription.
We'll pay it. We'll pay it. It doesn't matter.
We got it.
It's $4 a month, guys. It's $4 a month. Join
No,
Oz
he works
Whisky
for South
Come
Trade.
on,
We're fine.
come on.
But I'm not paying for for Woolies or Coles to pay up for the premium one to use all the reviews for their website. I'm not paying for individuals, yes. For the big boys, not so much.
And if you have a South Trade email address that's not $4 a month, it's $8. So you get to enjoy just as much. Fine.
It's kind of like Pay It Forward from South Trade.
Oh.
And this is a window into what your $4 a month Patreon subscription to Whisky Roundtable Up Late will get you.
Up late.
That's actually... I want to do that, though.
And on that note, we will see you all. I won't see you next week. I'm going to take 2 weeks off because I'm going to be head under with Sydney Whisky Forum, our fair replacement. But I'm sure Matt, Milne, and Alex will come up with something to have some fun with. And we will see you all. Well, I won't, but you'll have fun next week without me.
Rock and roll.
See you guys.
Thanks so much, guys. Cheers.